The English rock band called The Police rose to such fame with hits like Message in a Bottle and Every Breath You Take that drummer Stuart Copeland was eventually invited to compose a soundtrack for Insomniac Games' new mascot platformer, Spyro the Dragon. Copeland brought his distinctive rock sound and infused it throughout the soundtrack, dating back to the first 2 chords he ever learned on guitar.
But I did play guitar. There was a beat-up guitar around the house, and I figured out how to tune it up, and I figured out 2 chords. That's all you need. No, it's not bedtime yet.
That 1-4 progression is a solid go-to, so of course it's the first 2 chords of the game's main theme. That theme uses 1-4 in a sequence with other quickly changing chords. But more frequently, Copeland establishes a repeating melody for several measures on the 1 chord, then transposes all instruments up to sit on the 4 chord for a bit instead, featuring the same melody shapes but in this new pitch class. The first level, Stone Hill, gets right to it. Check out how this pentatonic bass line is established on the 1, before the entire shape is shifted up in its entirety to the 4 chord. Sometimes when it goes to the 4 chord, most instruments drop out for a couple of measures, then resume. It's a graceful pause while Spyro glides above the ground, before touching down for the instrument's re-entry. The 1-4 chord change is a staple of the soundtrack, occurring in more than half the game's level themes. Alpine Ridge provides another clear example of this transposition. Ready to peek behind the curtains to see how a chord change like this is accomplished?
Now this is really where I'm giving away the trade secrets, where I transpose that part from there up to there. And it plays that same piece of music. So I've just done a whole transition there, took all those instruments and moved them up that much. Looks like fun, doesn't it?
Part of why this wholesale transposition up to the 4 is so effective is because the bass grooves underneath provide sturdy pentatonic shapes to vibe with, using that scale that takes the normal 7 notes and pares it down to 5. These are the kind of simple riffs that you can make up on the fly while jamming with pals. This makes it a little less surprising that Copeland's composition process involved coming up with 4 song drafts in a single day, then returning the next day to finish that set of 4 tracks. But this rapid process did not result in tracks that feel one note or rushed. A prime example is my favorite song and level of the game, Dry Canyon. Hearing this bass line, I am just totally in the world of this scorching hot desert, sneaking around in the shade and keeping an eye out for birds of prey. And with this widespread use of the 1 and 4 chords throughout the soundtrack, it's only a matter of time before the 5 chord shows up. And with a wacky melody on top, Spyro's getting more and more loopy in the searing heat. Time and again, I tend to hear this portion when I miss this one really hard jump, and it's like the 5 chord is mocking Spyro during the walk of shame all the way back around to try again. As great as these pentatonic grooves can be, one aspect for composers to consider is that they don't exactly provide catchy, singable melodies. Like in real life, you've probably never heard a cyclist roll by while humming the bass line to Dry Canyon. Chicka-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, chicka-doo-doo-doo. Nah, you're more likely to hear someone sing a melody with stepwise movement up and down the scales, with a clear apex focal point. But this doesn't mean that Spyro's music is missing some essential component, because instead it takes the different route of enchanting ambience. To describe it abstractly, Spyro's melodies often feel like the nostalgic magic of those pollen bits floating in the air in Kokiri Forest, ideal for a fantasy adventure. A great way to capture this energy is with large groups of playful 16th notes, on full display in the first level. And notice how all these notes fall within the normal notes of the major scale, except the 7th, which is modified to become minor, which we know as the Mixolydian scale. Jake Lizio even went so far as to describe the Mixolydian scale as AC/DC's secret sauce, responsible for why your mom likes that band so much. This scale is fantastic for rebellious rock, because it takes the normal major scale's elegant, shining major 7th, but adjusting it to the minor 7th can get you a taste of edgy grit. Think dirt bike convention instead of Tea Party, but still including the sunny major 3rd. And the chord you can build on this flat 7 as the root was actually the 3rd chord that Copeland ever learned.
Okay, 3 chords is better than 2. And I still play those 3 chords. I love them, E, A, and D.
And it works.
What more is there to life?
And it works.
Yeah.
Sure enough, the title theme is rounded off with this flat 7 chord. This flat 7 also has ripple effects on the tonic home bass chord, the most sturdy pillars of which are 1 and 5, and those are constants that occur in both the major and minor scales. But the 3rd and 7th take direction from the major or minor key, so they're crucial elements that determine the feeling the chord generates in the listener. Spyro's go-to is a 1/7 chord, and its mixture of major 3rd and minor 7th contributes the perfect mix of cheerful and feisty. The Crystal Flight track has a moment that sits on this chord's funk, putting the major 3 minor 7 chord cloud on full display. And the distance between these 2 notes is exactly 6 semitones, the devil's interval. It's one thing to feature this unstable interval in a chord, but Copeland's not afraid to put it on center stage in the melodies. It's playful and almost humorous, the way the Terrace Village song sidesteps the sturdy tonic and 5 to ping-pong between the tones of this oddball interval. He even found a way to make it work in the first level, man. Pretty awesome that he can use this harsh interval while still accomplishing the game director's assignment to create music that was jaunty, so lively, cheerful, and self-confident. And the soundtrack is certainly bubbly, sparkly, and that Spyro there sure is frisky. Dude wants to gun it to the final boss in the opening cutscene. So of course the main Spyro jingle delivers just the right amount of bouncy fun. And it sounds really simple, but there's more to it than what meets the ear initially. To start, a quick listen sees the melody climbing upward to an apex, then seemingly climbing back down the same notes. But actually, that second to last note is a unique note that wasn't included on the upward path. That hidden note was enough to make me second guess which note is the one in the first place. Try to listen to it for yourself. Is this written in the key of this lowest note, so beginning and ending on the tonic? Or is the 1 actually here, meaning the melody ends on the 5, setting up the 5-to-1 energy for when the jingle repeats? The answer is all determined by how it's used in context in specific tracks, which reveals this to use the tonic on that lower option at the bottom. The Spyro jingle appears in a handful of levels, and the first boss, Toasty, especially shows this ambiguous tonic note in action. The song treats this note as the 1, but doesn't it sound like it could be up here instead? Especially with this post-jingle riffing. This inclination to hear the 1 in what is actually the 4 is partially explained by how frequently Copeland uses the 1 to 4 chord progression. It's found in 81% of the soundtrack's level themes. It's as if the 2 chords comprise a collective home base, so the 4th note in the scale feels so grounded. And even the rhythm of this hook is powerful in its simplicity. It would have been pretty boring if it was done in all 8th notes. But a syncopated push on the first measure's final note puts some pep in Spyro's step, and this small nudge just makes the whole jingle click into place. Since Copeland is a drummer by trade, of course he has syncopation on the mind. Some Police songs even syncopated entire lead melodies, sticking every note in the in-between spots between each beat, like in their song Message in a Bottle. I sent an SOS to the world, I sent an SOS to the world, I hope that someone gets mine. The Spyro soundtrack wastes no time, syncopating every note of the lead melody in the very first hub world. But Copeland's biggest rhythmic contribution to this game's sound was his adventurous approach to the backbeat, that normal drum beat of 1, 2, 3, 4, kick, snare, kick, snare. As useful and energetic as that pattern is, he found it too safe and predictable, and was always on the lookout for creative alternatives.
I don't want to play a backbeat. I want to find some other way of doing it. Still getting paid. And that's plenty of rhythm.
Soak in this rhythmic texture of Misty Bog and ask yourself, where's the snare drum? Nowhere. In the absence of obvious snare hits on beats 2 and 4, Dry Canyon has the baseball stadium organ serve that role instead. Most levels avoid an obvious backbeat, with the exception of the flying stages. These aerial challenges are basically Spyro's special stages, with only water underneath, which is an instant failure if you fall in. So without a level ground to run on, the music had to provide a steady foundation instead, with backbeat snares on beats 2 and 4, just like New Orleans intended. Whether you're chasing down trains or lighting up livestock for fuel, each level has its own unique dose of magic, for which Copeland earns a tip of the hat. He stepped into the video game world and created music that sounds like nothing that came before it on a disc or cartridge. This is all after he founded the biggest band of the early 80s, in addition to composing film scores for major motion pictures like Wall Street and Good Burger. And don't be surprised if you detect the Spyro flavor in some of his other projects. The theme song he made for the Nickelodeon sketch series The Amanda Show is just an expansion of Spyro's Wizard Peak level. I vibe with this music to an Ullililian extent. After a hard day of work, I love doing a Spyro run of the first 3 worlds, and I stream it sometimes too. By setting a goal for time and treasure, the game works quite well in a Sonic-style capacity. Just hurry up and grab rings. Playing these levels in order results in a treasure trove of a playlist that contributes to an enchanting magical journey, rich with detail to reward repeat listens. You know, the way we listen to complete albums into the 2000s.